My first days at Green Valley High. If I close my eyes and picture those first days at Green Valley High, I see a crisp autumn sky, the leaves swirling on the path as I walk toward the red brick building. My name is Rebecca Miller, and at 29, I landed what I dreamed of since college, an English teaching position at a respected high school in the leafy suburbs outside Boston. The moment I set foot in the teacher's lounge, paint peeling in the corners, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and old books, I felt like I was stepping into a new world. My heart raced with anticipation, and yes, a hint of anxiety. Would I live up to my students' expectations? Would I earn the respect of my colleagues? From the very start, every morning felt like an adventure. I arrived early, eager to list out lesson plans and rearrange desks so students would feel welcomed, not boxed into neat rows. The classroom windows caught the morning light, creating golden stripes on the faded tile floor. I remember practicing introductions, a little self-conscious about my voice and what stories I'd share. But all my nervousness melted away when the students started to trickle in. I saw curiosity in their eyes as we traded names and talked about our favorite books. Some were shy, clutching notebooks to their chests. Others leaned forward, already firing questions in cheeky comments that made me chuckle right along with them. The first week was a whirl of new faces, swirling paperwork, and a mess of emotions. There were moments I second-guessed myself. Was I being too strict? Too lenient? Should I have chosen a different novel to start? Still, I could sense a flicker of trust growing between my students and me. They seemed to appreciate my enthusiasm, and I quickly realized building rapport was as crucial as teaching Shakespeare or grammar. Some even stayed after class to chat about poetry, music, or their dreams for college. Outside the classroom, the halls buzzed with energy. Students racing toward the cafeteria, posters advertising clubs, and football tryouts. Teachers gathered in small clusters, sharing stories, gripes, and coffee. Here, I felt like a rookie, stepping onto a new playing field, eager to learn the rules, keen to make friends. Mrs. Johnson from the history department showed me where to find extra supplies, while Coach Brian introduced me at the first faculty meeting, making me laugh when he warned everyone about my dangerously positive attitude. Looking back, those days were painted with hope and a stubborn belief that anything was possible. I worked late, fussing over lesson plans and decorating bulletin boards. I wanted every student to feel my passion for words and stories. At night, I'd replay the day's conversations in my mind, imagining how I might connect better, encourage more. It was a season of endless possibility, untainted by doubt or disappointment. At least, for a little while, rumblings below the CRI surface. As the first semester wore on, some subtle tensions started brewing in the background, almost like a storm gathering behind a sunny sky. On the surface, everything looked harmonious. Teachers smiled in passing, students seemed to enjoy my classes, and the faculty emails were laced with cheerful encouragement. But it didn't take long for me to sense that not everyone welcomed my presence with open arms. The first signs were small. A passing remark about how much energy I was bringing to the department, or a brusque answer when I asked about past curriculum choices. Mr. Robert Jenkins, a math teacher who'd been at Green Valley for over 2 decades, seemed especially distant. He rarely attended staff socials and always gave curt, measured responses when I brought up anything new I was trying in my classroom. I chalked it up, at first, to generational differences. After all, What would a seasoned veteran have in common with a newcomer like me? However, the whispers began to amplify. One afternoon, as I lingered behind to grade essays, I overheard muffled voices in the hallway. Words like favorite, show off, and disrupting how we do things here floated through the door. At lunchtime, conversations sometimes quieted when I approached. I found myself wondering if I was overthinking it, or if my efforts to engage students had somehow rubbed some colleagues the wrong way. There were moments when it stung. The eye rolls during staff meetings, when I volunteered new ideas, or the sideways glances exchanged over coffee, when students would drop by just to chat about books. What cut deepest was the way some of my more honest colleagues, like Ms. Palmer from Social Studies, confessed that Robert and a couple of others saw the attention I was getting from students as a threat. They believed in maintaining the old ways, and my ambition, eagerness, and genuine rapport with kids had unsettled the established order. Despite the mounting tension and the barely concealed sarcasm, I tried to keep my focus steady on the students, on the reason I'd become a teacher in the first place. But the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing week. It was as if I'd unintentionally set off a series of quiet ripples that now threatened to tip the whole pond. I reminded myself, day after day, that genuine connection and integrity would always matter most. Even so, some afternoons, I'd leave the school feeling the weight of unspoken judgments pressed down on my shoulders like a leaden raincoat, and silently hope I'd be strong enough to weather whatever storm might come next. The crushing blow from the administration. It was deep into my second winter at Green Valley High, the kind where ice clung stubbornly to windshields and your breath seemed to freeze the moment you stepped outside. I remember the exact Tuesday because the day started so ordinary. A mug of oversteeped tea, a desk overflowing with essays to grade, students gently ribbing each other over a group project. I was prepping for third period when a note arrived in my mailbox. Please come to Principal Harris's office. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it was probably a routine check-in or maybe a conversation about the curriculum. When I entered, Principal Harris sat at her desk with a stack of files, her lips pressed in a firm line. Beside her was Mr. Richard Donnelly, the assistant principal, and to my surprise, Mr. Jenkins too. They didn't ask me to sit. A small detail that I'd later realize signaled something was very wrong. Principal Harris went straight to the point. Her words hit like cold water. Rebecca, we have received several serious complaints about your conduct. You've been accused of showing favoritism toward certain students, of leaking exam questions prior to official test dates, and of failing to maintain proper classroom management standards. She slid a folder across the desk. Here are copies of emails and written statements we've received. For a moment, my ears rang so loudly, I struggled to focus. I sifted through the printouts, scanning lines hastily composed, some anonymously signed, others bearing names I recognized, names of teachers I thought I could trust. Each accusation stung. She let her favorite students choose easier topics. Her review sessions before finals felt suspiciously close to the real thing. There were screenshots of messages pulled from context and a list of supposed witnesses, including staff and even a few students. Rebecca, these are serious violations, Principal Harris continued, her voice flat as if we were discussing someone else's life. I tried to assemble words, to explain that I always gave every student a fair chance, that my exam review sheets were listed in the online portal for all, and that classroom management, while lively, was always respectful. But it was as if the decision had already been made. Mr. Donnelly barely glanced up from the notepad where he jotted observations. And Mr. Jenkins' folded arms and steely gaze spoke volumes. The meeting blurred together. Questions were thrown out rapid fire. Why had my classroom door sometimes been left ajar? Did I realize how compromising that looked? What about the parent who claimed her daughter felt singled out during grading? I answered as best I could, but nothing seemed to stick, except the doubt on their faces, as if my defense was just another line in a never-ending script of excuses they'd heard before. The word suspension echoed in the air. I was asked to clean out my things until the administration could complete a full review. The phrase felt like a punch to the gut. Did I want a union rep present? Did I have anything else to say? I think I mumbled something, my hands trembling as I clutched my lesson planner like a lifeline. I hardly remember walking back to my classroom, where students were already passing in the hall, blissfully unaware of the tidal wave that had just hit their teacher. By the end of that day, it was like word had leaked. Colleagues avoided my eyes in the hallways. The teacher down the corridor, who always joined me for lunch, suddenly closed her door. I gathered my books, each one feeling strangely heavy, and drove home in a daze. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours, the accusations ricocheting through my mind. In the days that followed, the pain deepened. I'd spent years believing in the power of education, in kindness, in justice. Now, my own integrity, something I'd cherished, was ripped apart in a matter of hours by a few sheets of paper, some twisted narratives, and a handful of colleagues I never imagined would turn their backs. At that moment, as snow drifted against my window, I wondered if I'd ever be able to clear my name or find my way back to the classroom that once felt like home. The darkest period. The days and weeks following my suspension blurred together, everyone colored by loneliness, shame, and a gnawing sense of injustice. Morning came heavy and gray through my apartment window. I'd wake, expecting to catch the bus, hear student laughter in the hallway, smell the musty old books. Instead, I was met with silence and doubt. At first, I tried to fill my days by keeping busy. I organized my lesson plans, cleaned my kitchen cupboards, even tried to read for pleasure, though every book seemed to mock me. The guilt and humiliation clung like a second skin. I stayed up late, replaying the accusations. How had my life, so full of promise and purpose just weeks ago, derailed so fast, so completely? I thought about every student I taught, every colleague interaction, desperate to spot the moment things tipped. Then, there were the messages. Some friends from school reached out with cautious support, awkwardly tiptoeing around the mess. Others, people I once thought of as work family, kept their distance, afraid maybe that my bad luck was contagious. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for more bad news. A former student's parent asking questions, vague threats from strangers, new rumors spreading like wildfire in the faculty group chat. Sometimes I imagine the staff room discussions, my name spoken in hushed tones, theories passed around like gossip at a high school cafeteria. I wish I could say I was strong, but the truth is, I fell into a pit of despair. For days, I barely left my apartment. Food lost its flavor. Music felt abrasive. Sleep eluded me. The world kept turning outside, a world I felt permanently locked out of. I was gripped by a sense of loss, more profound than anything I could have imagined. The loss of trust, belonging, and identity. Who was I, if not a teacher? What did any of my hard work matter now that my reputation had been so thoroughly shattered? I cycled through anger and grief. Some days, I fantasized about confronting those who'd betrayed me, demanding answers or apologies that would surely never come. Other days, I was convinced maybe I deserved this. Maybe I'd tried too hard, loved my job too openly, failed in some way I couldn't quite see. Depression wrapped around me, coaxing me to retreat entirely from the world. It was the loneliest I'd ever felt, and yet, in the stillness of those dark days, faint glimmers of hope stirred, almost in spite of myself. Emails arrived from a handful of students, messages saying they missed our debates, that no one else made them love books quite the way I did. One kid wrote, "Mrs. Brooks, you taught me to fight for myself. Don't give up." At first, these notes only made me cry harder, but over time, they planted tiny seeds of resolve. I remembered why I started teaching in the first place: to make a difference for kids who needed it. I remembered my parents, both public school teachers, drilling into me that integrity mattered more than popularity, that truth had a way of coming out. Gradually, those lessons began to take root again. I allowed myself to hope, just a little, that vindication might be possible, or at least that I could find the courage to try. I spent hours combing through past emails, gathering lesson plans, documenting everything I could remember from the past semester. I called my union rep and asked hard questions. Slowly, doggedly, I began to assemble my own defense. It felt impossible, but I had to try. I owed it to myself, to my students, and to the idea that truth, even bruised and battered, was still worth fighting for. The world outside was still unfriendly, but each small action, a phone call, an email, a list of names, became an act of resistance. The shame and loneliness didn't vanish overnight, but day by day, they lost their grip. I promised myself that I would not let the lies stand. Not if there was any way I could still speak, still hope, still teach. And so I fought, one excruciating, determined step at a time. Rising again, my relentless pursuit of justice. After months trapped in the shadows of suspicion and grief, something began to spark inside me. A stubborn sense that I could not simply fade away. While the ache of betrayal and loss lingered heavy on my shoulders, I found myself replaying my years as an educator. The laughter I'd shared with my students, the long hours spent grading essays, the pride I'd felt when a struggling teenager discovered a passion for reading. The idea that my name might forever be stained by a lie was simply unbearable. I knew if I ever wanted to regain my life, I had to face the fire head-on. Others might have disappeared, quietly accepted their fate, or even started over elsewhere. But I was never one to retreat. If I let this go, if I let them silence my voice, it wouldn't just be my own integrity I'd lose. It would be a blow to every honest educator who stuck their neck out for students, who challenged the status quo because they believed in something greater. I owed it to myself, to my students, and to the profession to fight back. The first steps were lonely, awkward, and often fruitless. I started by methodically gathering every shred of evidence I could find. I went through months of emails, lesson plans, attendance sheets, anything that could trace my actions and decisions during the time in question. I spent days in my cramped apartment, the walls lined with boxes of photocopied correspondence and sticky notes filled with questions I needed to answer. When my confidence faltered, I reminded myself how much I'd already survived and how much was still at stake. I reached out, cautiously at first, to former students and their parents. It felt strange, asking for help after so long. A few parents didn't answer. One responded curtly that they didn't want to get involved, which stung far more than I'd expected. But the handful who did reply made all the difference. Some students wrote me long, heartfelt letters, recounting how I'd encouraged them, how I'd given every kid a fair shot, how I'd never shown favoritism. One mother sent me copies of our all-class email threads, proof that every review session and study guide I'd provided was shared with everyone, not just a select few. Next, I started looking at school records. This was tricky, since my access to the school's internal systems had been cut off the morning I was suspended. But I had saved copies of some digital documents, and my union representative, Linda Jackson, tough and soft-spoken, helped file official requests for transparency. Through those requests, we secured security camera footage showing I'd never met privately with students in ways that could be deemed inappropriate, despite rumors to the contrary. Detailed class rosters comparing who attended which review sessions showed I only ever held group meetings. As my case grew, I also focused on the accusations themselves. I examined each claim: favoritism, leaking test information, unfair grading. I compared these with my meticulously kept records. I built a time-stamped log of every review email, every assignment outline I sent. Where vague, anonymous complaints had once cast doubt, now I had concrete evidence showing my actions clearly aligned with the school's standard policies and transparency guidelines. Yet the hardest part came when I realized that some of the statements against me had been manipulated. Excerpts of conversations taken out of context, or records that had been mysteriously edited prior to administration review. It infuriated me, but also steeled my resolve. I began contacting colleagues, both those who had kept their distance and a few who'd once been friendly. Some remained unhelpfully vague, afraid to choose sides. But two, including a fellow junior teacher named Peter Tran and the guidance counselor, Sarah Morgan, agreed to give sworn statements about what they knew. Neither had seen any evidence of one-on-one coaching sessions or exam leaks. Sarah recalled staff conversations where a few senior teachers openly discussed their unease with my new methods, vindicating my theory that resistance to change was at the root of their campaign against me. Parallel to this, Linda helped me mount a formal appeal with the local Board of Education. Together, we organized a timeline, created summary sheets of all the evidence, and carefully cross-referenced every accusation with both my records and testimony from students and staff. Preparing the appeal was grueling, both mentally and emotionally. For every supportive statement I received, I'd encounter another rumor or cold shoulder circulating in the local teaching community. There were days I considered giving up, when the weight of it all threatened to crush what little hope I had left. But I thought of the kids who'd written me, the tears in their words, and focused on what was true. When the hearing day finally arrived, I barely slept the night before. I can still remember Linda picking me up at dawn, a chilly spring morning in late April, and driving me to the district office. We waited for hours as other matters were resolved, my palms sweating against my notebook, crammed with evidence. When my turn finally came, I felt oddly calm, as if all the anxiety had crystallized into sheer determination. I knew the truth was on my side. I just had to present it clearly and trust that someone was willing to listen. Before the board, I laid out my defense, the timeline of emails, copies of review materials, testimonies, alibis. I answered every question, my voice surprisingly steady. Linda interjected where necessary, pointing out inconsistencies in the administration's case, missing dates, questions left unasked, suspicious edits to so-called official transcripts. When the panel asked about the accusations of favoritism, I provided the detailed schedules and emails showing my consistent, public approach. On the topic of leaks, I demonstrated how every material I shared as a study aid had always gone through official channels, and explained the transparency I'd practiced throughout. Perhaps most powerfully, I read brief excerpts from student and parent testimonials. Their words brought home the heart of the matter. I'd built trust, not just as a teacher, but as a mentor. I watched some of the board members' expressions soften as I spoke. When I concluded, I didn't ask for pity. I simply asked for fairness and the opportunity to clear my name. The deliberation that followed felt endless. Even after the hearing adjourned, it took several weeks for the final decision to come down. During that time, I devoted myself to self-care as best I could, finding solace in the routines I'd neglected. I took walks through the city's parks, wrote in my journal, finally read some books for pleasure. Though, inevitably, I chose stories about resilience and justice. I reached out to friends and family, forced myself to re-enter the world. There were times when the fear of being judged or whispered about threatened to undo my progress, but I was learning to stand tall in the face of doubt. Then, one Friday afternoon, the call came. The board had found no credible evidence to support the charges against me. The suspension was overturned, my name formally cleared, and the school district was directed to reinstate me with back pay and a formal apology. I sat on my couch in stunned silence, the air shimmering with relief. I wept, not just for vindication, but for all the nights I'd spent doubting myself, for the kids who'd stood by me, and for the lesson learned. Truth, however battered, can survive. Returning to Green Valley High was bittersweet. Some faces were apologetic, others avoided my gaze, but there was a warmth in the welcome from students. A chorus of cheers in the hallway, a child's hand clutching mine in thanks. I could not undo the suffering I'd endured, nor the friendships fractured, but I had returned with my spirit intact, my reputation restored, and an even deeper conviction that truth must always be defended, even when the world conspires in darkness. From then on, I became a quiet advocate for others, mentoring teachers dealing with similar struggles, speaking at educational forums about the power of persistence and the importance of keeping one's integrity, no matter the cost. My story, once a source of sorrow and shame, became the foundation for a greater strength, not just for me, but for those who, in silence, battle for the right to be seen, valued, and believed. The truth unveiled. The weeks that led up to the fact-finding hearing felt like the slow build before a thunderstorm, an almost electrical tension in the air. Every time I double-checked a document or lined up another printout on my kitchen table, my apartment transformed into what looked like the office of a determined, if slightly eccentric, private investigator. Stacks of annotated lesson plans, bulging folders of email printouts, color-coded sticky notes mapping out timelines and accusations. Each morning, I brewed coffee so strong it made my hands shake. And then, I'd sit at my makeshift war room, rereading every student correspondence, every curriculum update, every innocuous note that might serve as a pebble in the avalanche to clear my name. And yet, beneath my determination, I carried a relentless current of anxiety. What if it wasn't enough? What if I'd missed some small, crucial detail that would let my detractors paint their version of events as the whole truth? Every night, sleep came in fitful starts, my mind circling back to the faces of my students, the laughter that once filled my classroom, the trust I so cherished. The weeks trickled by, painfully, slowly. My union representative, Linda, encouraged me at every step. "You're not alone in this," she'd tell me. her voice a steady anchor during my storms of self-doubt. The day the notice arrived from the district, official investigatory hearing scheduled, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure the neighbors could hear it through the wall. I spent the night before the hearing not sleeping, but instead pacing, rehearsing my statement out loud. I laid out my evidence in order. Proof that every study guide had been shared school-wide, attendance sheets for every review session, written testimony from students and parents, a digital paper trail impossible to deny. I forced myself to imagine sitting on that panel, hearing my own story from the outside. I wanted, not just needed, to sound credible, calm, and deeply human. On the morning of the hearing, a cold, persistent drizzle slicked the streets outside. Boston's usual springtime ambiguity, refusing to deliver anything so simple as a sunny day. Linda picked me up in her car, and we drove mostly in silence, the windshield wipers metronomic. I clung to my tote bag, loaded with evidence, as if it could somehow shield me from what was to come. Arriving at the district office, the atmosphere felt intimidating. Sterile corridors, the lingering aroma of burnt coffee, the hush of a building designed to make people wait. There were other educators waiting for their own hearings, some staring at their phones, others steeled with the kind of grim endurance you only learn when you've been wronged and must fight to be believed. For a dizzying moment, I wondered how many of them were, like me, innocent, but caught in the crosshairs of rumor and rumor's best friend, institutional inertia. When my name was called, my legs felt numb, but I drew in a breath, thought of my parents, both teachers, both fierce defenders of their own students, both believers that justice wasn't something you waited for, but something you chased, even uphill. And I walked in. The panel was a small group, 2 members from the superintendent's office, a lawyer, a representative from the teachers' union, and a neutral facilitator. Principal Harris was there, as was Mr. Donnelly, both perched on the opposite side of the table, faces hard to read. I took my seat, Linda by my side, my evidence binder laid flat, like a shield. The hearing began formally, almost coldly. Principal Harris summarized the accusations. It stung to hear them repeated as statements of fact, as if context and complexity had no role in the machinery of bureaucracy. As she spoke, I scanned the faces of the board, looking for any flicker of empathy or doubt, or even boredom. At the very least, I hoped for fairness. Then it was my turn. My hands trembled at first, but as I spoke, outlining my timeline, referencing returned emails, holding up the stack of lesson plans and shared materials, I felt a surge of the old teaching adrenaline. This was my chance to make them see me as more than a punchline or a cautionary tale. I let my voice lilt with the same passion I had for Shakespeare and Baldwin, for poetry and debate club. I read aloud pieces of testimony from students. Mrs. Brooks believed in all of us, not just the top of the class, one had written. Another, I never felt left out. She's the first to tell us that learning is for everyone. The board listened. They questioned. Some of their questions were pointed. Why had I chosen new review formats? How did I assign extra help sessions? But every time, I produced the receipts, records, schedules, full class emails, a log showing that any student who requested support had received it. I even brought backup printouts of the school's own grading policies, underlining how my practices matched or exceeded expectations. The lawyer representing the district presented the statements of complaint, and this time, Linda intervened. She pointed out inconsistencies, highlighted the lack of direct evidence, asked the panel to consider the high volume of student support that corroborated my story. Two witnesses appeared on my behalf, Peter Tran and Sarah Morgan, their honest testimonies echoing in the wide, chilly conference room. I never saw Rebecca single out anyone for easier tasks, Peter said quietly. She pushed us all, students and teachers alike, to do better. I stared at the folded paper in front of me, knuckles white. In the hours of deliberation that followed, the board asked follow-up questions, sifting painstakingly through the timelines. More than once, they returned to the odd gaps in the original complaints, finally pressing Principal Harris on why some statements lacked dates and why certain allegations appeared to echo each other. Not in detail, but in phrasing, as if borrowed from a template or suggested behind the scenes. When the lunch break was called, I wandered the quiet halls, uncertain if I should feel hope or dread. Linda found me on the stairs, her arm a reassuring presence on my shoulder. "Whatever happens, you've shown them the truth," she said, and I forced myself to believe her, even as doubt nipped at my heels. After lunch, the panel reconvened. This time, the tone was different. They requested one more review of my documentation, lingering over the pages with highlight marks, sticky notes, and signatures. "We are looking for truth, not merely procedure," said the facilitator, his voice soft but resolute. For the first time, a sliver of light broke through the thick cloud hanging over my heart. The session adjourned late. I left without an answer, just a promise from the board that a decision would be delivered in writing within the week. The walk back to the car felt longer than any marathon, and the following days blurred together. I kept my phone close, my email constantly refreshed. Sometimes nerves got the better of me, and I'd comb back through my files, searching for gaps, fearing I'd made some crucial mistake. Then, on a Friday 10 days later, Linda called, "Check your email, right now." I opened the letter with hands shaking so fiercely I could hardly click. The words, official, dry, yet almost impossibly beautiful, stood out among the bureaucratic jargon. After careful review of evidence and testimony from all sides, found no corroborating evidence in support of the charges levied against Mrs. Rebecca Brooks. All disciplinary actions to be rescinded. Full reinstatement, retroactive to beginning of suspension period. I reread the words a dozen times, hardly daring to breathe. Then, sobs shook my chest. Equal parts relief and exhaustion, hope, and something just south of triumph. I had survived. I had been vindicated. I was, at last, free. Returning to Green Valley was surreal. Some colleagues greeted me with brave smiles. Others avoided eye contact, ashamed, or still hostile. I didn't know. The students, however, made their feelings clear, with spontaneous applause in the hallway, handwritten notes, and tearful reunions that made my heart ache with gratitude. I knew I'd never be quite the same. I understood, now, that truth doesn't always win easily, that clearing your name is as much about endurance as it is about evidence. The months spent fighting suspicion would scar me, but they'd also forged in me a steelier resolve. I found new compassion for others, students, colleagues, strangers, navigating their own storms. And I would tell anyone willing to listen, when the world grows dark and small, even one tiny lantern of truth, stubbornly tended, can change everything. Lessons for life. There's an old saying my mother used to repeat: adversity reveals character. If you'd asked me about it a few years ago, I might have nodded politely, taken the words to heart, but failed to feel them in my bones. But after walking through the fire, having my name sullied, my spirit battered, and my faith in justice pushed to its breaking point, I know their truth with a clarity won by suffering. The experience at Green Valley High gave me more than scars and war stories. It transformed the way I see myself, my students, and the world at large. Looking back, it is almost surreal. I remember the girl who first stepped into the teacher's lounge all those months ago, brimming with ideas and an almost naive belief that passion and hard work made you untouchable. That version of me seemed so certain, faithful to the idea that if you planted good seeds, only good things would grow. But the real world, as I soon learned, is wilder and far less predictable. Seeds grow in their own time, in ways we never expect. And sometimes storms come not because we caused them, but because we dared to stand in the light. It took being knocked down again and again to realize the true measure of courage. It's not in having a perfect record, nor in being universally liked. No, real courage is much quieter. It's in the moments you drag yourself out of bed, despite wanting to disappear. When you answer yet another phone call that might be more bad news, or when you show up, trembling but determined, to tell your truth before people who seem not to care. Life, I discovered, is made of little acts of bravery, more than it is shaped by grand gestures. Redefining success. If my ordeal taught me anything, it was to let go of old, brittle notions of success. Before all of this, I would have measured achievement by my students' grades, my colleagues' respect, awards tacked to my bulletin board. But once those things were stripped away, and all that was left was me, I was forced to ask harder questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What matters when the world stops cheering? Real success, I found, means being able to look yourself in the mirror and know you did not betray your principles, even when betraying them might have spared you suffering. It means holding on to your integrity as stubbornly as a drowning person grips a lifeline. At my lowest, when the voices of doubt and regret felt strongest, I would close my eyes and ask, did I do the right thing? The answer, though sometimes whispered, was always enough to steady me. That, I think, is a victory far deeper than any trophy. On empathy and seeing others, there's another lesson that caught me by surprise. How suffering cracks your heart wide open to others' pain. Before, I'd always prided myself on being an empathetic teacher, a person who noticed when a student's eyes drifted or when a colleague's voice quaked across the lunch table. But empathy, I now realize, is not static. It grows as your own heart is broken and pieced back together. In surviving my ordeal, I learned to recognize, almost instinctively, the subtle signals of distress in others. The students who linger after class, not for extra help, but for solace. The teachers whose sudden silence means the worst, not the best. My pain made me gentler. Instead of responding to others' struggles with quick fixes or empty reassurances, I learned to simply sit with them, to listen, to let the silence gather and only break it when trust allowed. I understood on a cellular level that what most people need in their darkest moments is not advice, but the reassurance that they are seen and not alone. I resolved, as I rebuilt my career, to become a refuge for people caught in storms they never sought, to be someone who never turns away from discomfort or despair. Learning to embrace vulnerability in the past, I saw vulnerability as a kind of weakness, a gap in one's armor that left you open to attack. But after being dragged through the mud, forced to expose every corner of my work and soul to scrutiny, I realized how much strength it truly takes to stay open. Vulnerability is walking back into Green Valley High after months of humiliation, holding your head high, even as some faces turn away. It's standing in front of your students and letting them see you, unvarnished and real. with nothing to hide and no guarantees that their opinions won't hurt you. I began to appreciate that vulnerability is the birthright of every honest person, especially in professions of service, like education. Some days, I cringed at memories of breaking down in front of my union representative, my voice shaking, tears threatening. But I grew to understand. If I wanted to foster true trust and connection with others, I had to let them see my imperfections. In doing so, I invited them to share their burdens with me, fostering a space where real healing and growth could take root. Standing up, speaking out. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of all was about the power and necessity of speaking out against injustice. There were so many times I wanted to shrink, to avoid making waves, to just let the unfairness pass over me like a storm I could outlast. But each act of silence, each time I considered just moving on without protest, felt like a small death inside. I realized that the only path forward, the only way to regain a sense of wholeness, was to stand up firmly and clearly for myself. Not just for my own sake, but for all those who witnessed what happened and wondered if their own voices mattered. In the process of defending myself, I discovered a courage I didn't know I had. Advocacy, I found, is exhausting, lonely, and often unsexy. It's writing letters long past midnight, making phone calls you dread, sharing your story again and again when you'd rather retreat into silence. But it's also empowering. The moments when my voice shook but did not falter, when I articulated exactly how I'd been wronged and demanded fairness, became anchors I could return to in future storms. Since my reinstatement, I have counseled other teachers going through their own battles, some wrongfully accused, others struggling with less visible wounds. My story, hard as it was, became a lantern for them. I didn't have answers to offer, only companionship on a difficult road. Sometimes that was all that was needed. I took pride not in being a survivor, but in being a witness and ally, redefining community and trust. The crucible of my experience also stripped away illusions I'd had about community and trust. Before this ordeal, I was perhaps too quick to trust in the goodness of institutions, too eager to believe that doing the right thing guaranteed protection, or even gratitude. It is a painful thing to learn that organizations, no matter how well-intentioned, sometimes act to protect themselves instead of the truth. The sting of betrayal from people I once called friends, and the chilling indifference of those in power was perhaps the hardest lesson to swallow. But on the flip side, my faith in individuals and in small acts of decency grew tenfold. The chorus of student voices, the handwritten notes, and the silent presence of a true friend or a compassionate administrator taught me that hope is found in people, not systems. I learned to gravitate toward genuine connections, to cultivate trust deliberately, and to offer it with care rather than abandon. I also learned to forgive, not in the sense of forgetting, but in releasing the poison of resentment. Holding grudges only tethered me to my pain. By letting go, I freed myself to notice beauty again, in a classroom discussion that lights up, in a student's brave confession, in the resilience of my own heart. Community isn't flawless unity. It's fractured people choosing, again and again, to care, despite disappointment, finding meaning in the struggle. Over time, I came to realize that suffering is a teacher. One of the hardest, certainly, but also one of the most generous. I would never wish on anyone the heartache of public accusation, the humiliation of exile, or the shadow of suspicion. But having walked that road, I cannot deny how it taught me to savor moments of peace and joy more intensely. Each day, I returned to my classroom. I marveled at the ordinary miracles, the grace of a well-timed joke, a student's victory over writer's block, a quiet lunchtime spent in solidarity with a colleague. My time in the dark taught me gratitude for resilience, for advocacy, for a job I'd almost lost but regained with deeper humility. I noticed I approached my lessons differently, less focused on perfection, more invested in creating space for failure and growth. I welcomed difficult conversations, heard criticism without reflexively defending myself, and encouraged students to speak out against what felt unfair to them. My experience became a wellspring I drew from, not just in the stories I told, but in the way I listened and responded. Suffering also drilled into me the importance of self-care. During my lowest points, I often neglected even the basics: sleep, food, joy. Now, I champion self-kindness as fiercely as academia, reminding myself and my students, you are more than your worst days. Take care of yourself, because it's the only way you'll last. Hope as a daily practice. The final, most precious lesson carved from my hardship is about hope and the necessity of practicing it, stubbornly and repeatedly, even when circumstances seem bleak. Hope isn't a feeling that floats down from above or a naive optimism that ignores hardship. Instead, it's a conscious choice to wake and try again, to offer a kind word when it would be easier to keep silent, to believe that your story matters, even when the world tries to write you off. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible, and days when I questioned whether fighting for my reputation was worth the pain. What kept me going was the flickering certainty, sometimes just a tiny spark, that my students deserved a teacher who didn't let fear or injustice win. They deserved to see resilience in action, to learn firsthand that darkness can be survived, and that truth and goodness are worth defending. Now, whether I'm comforting a student who's been misunderstood or mentoring a new teacher overwhelmed by self-doubt, I carry that hard-won lesson forward. I remind them that ugly rumors and difficult seasons do not define us. What endures is not the narrative others force upon us, but the dignity with which we bear our truth. Legacy and the ripple effect. Perhaps the bitterest irony and greatest reward of all was seeing how my ordeal rippled outward, sometimes in ways I never intended or even knew. I can't count the number of times a student or colleague has quietly thanked me, not just for returning, but for refusing to let cynicism harden me. My scars made me relatable, not weak. My return was a message that wounds can heal, reputations can be rebuilt, and life does, in fact, move forward. The story I once wanted so badly to forget became, over time, an integral part of my legacy. Years after the storm, former students still reach out, some sharing their own stories of injustice or uncertainty. They tell me they clung to my persistence as proof that the arc of their story, too, could bend toward justice. In staff meetings, I'm sometimes asked to share what I learned, to help rebuild trust in systems so often shaken by suspicion. My advice isn't revolutionary, just this: lead with compassion, defend the vulnerable, and never give up on yourself or the truth. If there is any wisdom I would pass down, it is this: life will be unspeakably hard sometimes. You will be wrongly accused, misunderstood, and deeply hurt by people you thought you could trust. But in those moments, don't retreat or become bitter. Instead, meet adversity with as much honesty, courage, and hope as you can muster. Let it temper you, but never erase your love of what and whom you serve. Looking forward and back today, as I stand at the whiteboard or stroll the halls filled with lively chatter, I carry all the lessons, the pain, the growth, the gratitude. I know now that integrity is fragile but fiercely resilient, that truth sometimes needs a champion, and that the most important things you teach are rarely part of any curriculum. I'm ultimately grateful, not for the ordeal itself, but for the doorways it opened. It made me wiser, braver, and more compassionate. Sometimes I catch sight of my own reflection in the window, older, changed, but standing tall. I whisper a silent thanks to the teacher I once was, and promise not to let go of the wonder and courage that got me through. For anyone else facing the darkness, I offer my story. You can come back from even the loneliest exile, stronger and with more love to give. That is the lesson that lasts. That, and the unbreakable belief that even in a world that sometimes gets everything wrong, truth, kindness, and hope always deserve the final word.